On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jeff Smith. He is the CTO of Octave. We're going to be talking about part of his journey in joining Octave. So he came to CTO in the last year and change. And a couple of things that he'll be touching on is, he's joining a company that's obviously HIPAA regulated. It's something that he hadn't been a part of before. And we're going to talk about some of the changes and approaches that he's had to make adjustments to. And also some of the factors that he saw in wanting to join. I think a lot of people, when they're going through making those pivots and changes in their careers, they go through a framework, and it'll be interesting to pick his mind in terms of how he ended up making that call to join Octave. Jeff, thanks for being on the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I know you're the CTO, so I think everyone will have a good idea that you're responsible for all things technology. But for those that are not familiar with Octave.
Sure. Octave is a mental health care company. We deliver mental health services to people, clients directly. We have services that we offer, typically individual therapy or couples therapy, and we offer those services in the state of New York and the state of California. We actually have 5 clinical offices that we're hoping to start seeing patients in again after the next kind of round of COVID waves dies down. And there are 2 offices in San Francisco, 2 in New York City, and now 1 in Los Angeles.
Awesome. I guess that's going to be quite a shift, having to deal with the logistics of that go around the office, which is a whole probably separate topic and episode itself. Yeah. I guess the episode we're going to be talking about, you're joining Octave. Obviously mental health. We're talking about a HIPAA regulated industry. You obviously have joined in the last year and a half, so some of this stuff is fresh. And the one thing I always look at when people make decisions to join companies, given joining an industry that's not necessarily something they've spent their whole life into, how they get to that point, and definitely want to pick your mind. And I guess when you were first, back in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, looking for a role. Well, actually, before you answer I was going to ask you what your mindset was. But when you started looking at the pandemic and the peak of it, and you were trying to look at opportunities, what was going through your mind? I was just out of curiosity.
Sure. So I made a very conscious and deliberate pivot in my career, really in 2019, to start working in the technology space where I could see how the work that I was doing, the products that I was developing, the technology that I was overseeing could directly benefit individuals' lives. So that was a conscious decision that I made. So that brought me to my job prior to being at Octave, which was much more in the fitness space. And after I had determined that it was time for me to look for my next role, it became clear to me that I was still very much motivated by mission. So that same mission of what are the things that I can do? What are the companies that I can work for that I can really see making a difference in people's lives? So I was fortunate enough to interview with Octave. And when the mission was explained to me very clearly, very directly, of we are going to broaden access to mental health care. We are going to try and get these services to people that typically can't afford them. We're going to try and get these services in communities that typically don't have them. That really resonated with me because it was a very direct link for me in that drive that I had to work somewhere where I was actually making a difference.
Awesome. I guess when you were at the time considering different opportunities and you were looking at, different companies that were making impacts, were there particular factors in those different company business models you're looking or considering to kind of evaluate one standing out versus the other?
So when I was looking at opportunities, there was really only 2 that I was evaluating between. I wasn't positive, but I wanted to make a change at the time. And I just happened to be approached by 2 specific organizations. Octave being very mission driven, like I mentioned. The other company also mission driven, but it didn't have that direct link to benefiting individual people that I could see. So it was much harder for me to tie that link all the way through. Whereas knowing that when I'm building technology and I'm working with the teams that I get to work with to get people in front of a therapist, it is just such a clear link and clear goal for me to know that what I'm doing makes a difference.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think it's, obviously I know you spent a long time at CA. You were at CA for a number of years, I think 14 years through an acquisition. So you'd spent a lot of your life there and obviously different type of product. And when you started looking for mission, I guess when you were kind of comparing and contrasting, what you were looking to find in the team, the type of technology you were going to manage, When you're looking at that experience at CA and having seen that acquisition go through for Rally, how are you kind of trying to evaluate the Octave one in particular, going, hey, I can kind of forward see where my impact's going to be, how I'm going to help better the product, how I'm going to improve the overall organization from my technical perspective?
Yeah, great question. So for me now in my career, as I'm deeper into my career, I don't write as much code as I used to. It's much more of an architecture and a strategy role, as well as a technical leadership role, as well as an executive role. Technical stack wasn't a huge factor for me. So as long as it wasn't something particularly antiquated, I wasn't that concerned with that. Mission for me was much more important. With that said, I feel pretty lucky at Octave, where the technical stack is extraordinarily modern. So we're using technologies that I think are very widely known and very much get people excited. So Python, Django, React, TypeScript. So it's nice to be at a company that, while isn't directly a software company, given that our product is mental health care, the decisions made prior to me were such that we were set up to be in a really good place foundationally. When I look at my prior experience, particularly in my long stint at Rally and then CA, I think there was some mission overlap there too. While Rally specifically, the mission wasn't necessarily human involved. The company itself was a very early adopter in things like, 1% give back and being a certified B Corp. So I think if I really look back in my career, those things have been important to me for a long time. And I just want to take that next leap to have a very, direct line of sight into people's well-being. And I think what that experience also allowed me to bring is all of my time working for SaaS companies, enterprise SaaS companies, as all sorts of roles from engineer to chief architect, allows me to bring that incrementalist software engineer mentality to a company that maybe wasn't used to having that. So it's allowed me to really focus on building a world-class engineering organization in a healthcare company, which isn't always the case, but it's been a really good journey for us. And we have some great patterns and practices in place where if you took the industry out of it, it would look like a very modern, very opportunity-rich technology organization.
It's got to be interesting because my wife's a marriage and family therapist, so I've seen the shift in how, the group works. I've kind of been watching that firsthand. And obviously, Octave is in a position with the pandemic, people being remote, needing access to mental health. I mean, that's obviously a great mission. And the one thing that kind of pops out that I think you'd mentioned was the HIPAA side of things. And obviously the complications around people are remote. You have to still follow HIPAA regulations. There's still protocols. And obviously in having joined, you previously didn't have experience yourself. So I guess kind of dive into that a little bit, in terms of joining a company with being HIPAA regulated. Did you have any preconceived notions? Was it a blank slate? Did you come in, with any thoughts of, hey, I've got some potential things to deal with? What were the initial steps like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I did come in with some preconceived notions that because of the regulatory environment that we're in around health information and HIPAA regulation, that we wouldn't be able to do some of the things that I hold near and dear as a technologist. So the ability to get to a place of continuous deployment, to not have a bunch of rigorous sign-off processes. I want to make sure that we're continuing to operate incrementally. I want to make sure that we don't get stuck in the situation where there's all this burden around data governance that doesn't allow us to move quickly and give teams the autonomy that they need to get new features out to our clients and our customers in general. What I found when I got into Octave is that much like other places that I've worked, if you take your data governance seriously and you take your security practices seriously, it is not as stigmatic of an issue as I thought it would be. So we have the ability to run like a modern organization. So I think that was just a little bit of prejudice on my side around what it is like to be in this environment. But I also took it as a challenge. I haven't been in it specifically. And now that I have, I think it gives me a really good understanding of what it takes to operate in these environments. And much like other aspects of software engineering, us having a very conscious and deliberate process around pulling security decisions as early into our process as possible has made it effectively a non-issue.
Interesting. I think the HIPAA side of things, I've asked the question a few times. It is interesting that people all mention, kind of echoing what your statement was, where what they had thought about the regulation side of it and kind of altering their work wasn't as bad as potentially it turned out to be. And I guess when you're kind of looking at, coming in and addressing some of the technical shortcomings with some of the HIPAA regulations, did you find yourself cracking open Wikipedia and documents and whatnot to ramp up?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So spent a bunch of time, looking around, like, what is PHI? Is this PHI? Is that PHI? And what does that mean? What are the regulatory things that we need to do with our hosting provider and our data centers, et cetera, just to make sure that we are up and running and compliant? So I've definitely spent some time learning and getting smarter about those regulations.
I guess that's the fun part of the new job as well. You're going to join, and every job has a ramp up. In this case, it's not the technical infrastructure that you have to worry about. It's the business factors. And I guess when you're kind of now, if you were to look back and advise yourself coming in, out of curiosity, like if you were to look back after the year and change you've been there, would you have done anything differently to start that would have given yourself a little bit a different head start maybe?
So I actually started at Octave the week between Christmas and New Year's of 2020. So I was fortunate enough to have basically a week where it was very, very quiet.
Yeah.
It gave me an opportunity to come in and really do a bunch of reading on things like HIPAA, really come up to speed on the technology stack, really start to understand patterns and practices, look at the code base and see how we deploy, like just in the quiet of, as a remote company, in the quiet of my home on a relatively quiet week. Things that I think I would do differently is always a great question. I'd love to kind of look back and retrospect. I would say getting smarter, faster on HIPAA. I think I paced that about right. I think there's only so much of those sorts of readings that you can do. I would say more important is just fundamental understanding as a CTO of all aspects of how data flows through the business. I could have gotten to a crisper understanding on that earlier. I could have dedicated significant time to that versus trying to piece it together on the fly. I'd say that's my biggest lesson learned over the last year.
Interesting. I guess that's, the HIPAA side of it. Obviously, you're eventually doing the job, you're going to get more nuanced and the depth of what you needed to do. And I guess as, I know you've been the senior director, VP of engineering. Was the CTO title much different for you from moving through like a VP of engineering title? Was it similar responsibilities, or was the scope of responsibility slightly different as well?
So I actually had the CTO title at my previous role as well.
Okay.
So the title itself wasn't new. I think the CTO role evolves, and we were very deliberate about this, particularly during my hiring. I asked a lot of questions about this, where we wanted it to go. I think when you're a small organization, the CTO role is a combination of being on the executive team, being the VP of engineering and running that organization, to some extent being an engineering manager, to some extent being an architect. And I think as the team grows and scales beyond where we're at right now, which is effectively one team, as we get to multiple teams of engineers working on multiple parts of the product simultaneously, that role, you start to shed some hats. So what I envision is continuing to shed hats, and the last hat that I will probably shed will be that VP of engineering hat. So when we get to a place where we're relatively big, we have significant investment in all areas of technology within the organization. So everything from data engineering to regular software development to potentially even machine learning and a security team, like all of those things in place. At that point, the CTO role for me will really be much more strategic and forward-looking around how we're going to use technology to drive where the business needs to go.
That's interesting too. I mean, I think when you're talking about that and becoming more of an executive and dropping that last VP of engineering hat, I think you're a technologist. I mean, you've been doing technology for quite a number of years. How will you feel giving up that? I'm sure it'll be just semi-trusted, so that's not the question. But how will you feel becoming slightly more disconnected from that engineering side, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually feel like I will get to a place where I'm more connected to the engineering side at that point. While I really enjoy doing direct hands-on management, I will continue to do that as a CTO. indefinitely. There will never be a time where I'm a CTO sitting off in a corner somewhere, not directly managing people. But I think it will free me up to some extent to think strategically about where we're going to push technology and how we're going to use it to really drive the business. So I don't feel like it's an active way for me to do less technical work. I think if anything, it's a way for me to do more technical work.
More strategic technical work, which is, I guess, the overhead of managing the actual engineering work obviously takes some of that time away.
It does, but I love doing it.
Yeah, you're a technologist. And I guess the context switching is it may be, the tricky part, because obviously putting on a strategic hat versus putting on, a more of a managerial hat. They are different. And I guess, as you become more honed on strategic, thinking and strategic impact, I mean, those skills get more keen. So I guess the one question that does pop up, like you mentioned, some of the dynamic aspects of the business and modern infrastructure. I know this episode was a little bit more focused on, your actual move and kind of the thought process of, finding the right opportunity for as a CTO. When you're starting to consider, and I'm going to ask you because we're a recruiting company and, we see this every day, the modern stack, which gives you a lot of the power and flexibility of what it offers, but also the hiring side of it is incredibly difficult. When you're kind of, sitting down and thinking ahead of, growing your team and your org and part of your role as the CTO is making sure that direction's set right. How are you tackling that? And I'm asking because it's a challenge that every technology leader is facing. I'm trying to get different perspectives, but how are you tackling just the need to bring in this modern, skill set in what we're seeing in the market right now?
Yeah. So I get asked a lot. Obviously, I interview a lot and I get asked a lot by candidates specifically, what does growth look like for me as an individual at Octave and how are you going to prepare for that? And so knowing that hiring would be a challenge from the time that I started, I very consciously and deliberately wrote up a solid organizational plan for what we're going to look like, not just in 2020, not just in 2021 or 2022, but out several years. And so for me, what I need to be very deliberate about was thinking about not just our technology stack to recruit people, not just our mission to recruit people, but also what opportunities can we give them? So I have plans to build an organization where engineers can come in and go on one of three distinct tracks and move deliberately and specifically and upward in their career. So 3 tracks are individual contributing engineer. So you want to be that engineer that gets to principal, senior principal, distinguished, whatever that looks like, where your job is writing great code, pushing our product forward, but really as an individual contributor. Second track is a pretty obvious one, is moving into some sort of manager role. So I wanted to call out specifically that individual contributor role first, because I did not want to fall into the trap of, I'm going to take my best engineers, I'm going to make them managers. I think not everyone wants to do that. People like to have other opportunities, and not every engineer is going to make the best manager, but some of them will. So I wanted that opportunity available as well. And then the third opportunity I think of as something like a technical lead or an architect. So that is for people that really want to maybe hone their skills on systems, on architectures, on making sure that they're laying technological runway for where the product is going, for be a little bit more forward looking. So I'm hoping that that combination of mission, of modern tech, of us wanting to be a world-class engineering organization and us having a specific plan for career pathing and growth is enough to get people to, not only apply, but interview and accept offers and come in and do great work and grow with us as a company.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting because obviously, having been there for a year and change, obviously having that organizational plan, early, I'm sure is helping guide you through this challenging hiring time because every leader I speak to is facing it. And those opportunities are, massively important. Everyone wants to know what happens next because the current job is fine, but everyone does want to plan out their own careers outside of the next job. So I think that's a brilliant thing you put in place early.
Yeah, as people are leaving positions, they're leaving for a reason. They want to know what's next for them. And I want people, once they're at Octave, to continue to know what's next for them. Hopefully with us at Octave. Like, I want to be able to grow people's careers here directly.
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic. And I was going to say, I appreciate you coming on and sharing. I think it's interesting to hear the perspectives of someone that's recently moved into CTO role at a really mission-driven company. I think you highlighted a lot of pretty awesome points. If somebody wants to get in touch with you about anything you said or wants to interview with you, is LinkedIn a good way of getting hold of you?
LinkedIn is a fine way to get a hold of me. You can also go to our website, which is findoctave.com. If you're curious about applying for any of our positions there on findoctave.com/careers.
Awesome. We'll include some of those in the show notes so people can have better access. And again, thanks for being on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back in, different guests, different topic. I always ask for two things. One, if you like the podcast episode, share it with somebody you know. That's how we've been growing, and it's been fantastic to see the growth. So thank you for that. And secondly, if you want me to talk about a specific topic, feel free to let me know, and I will do my best to find a guest to speak to that topic. Until next time, goodbye.